Okay, y'all, today we are going to talk about multisensory language MSL instruction. And I know you already talked about this to some extent with Dr. Schneider in the class you had with her, but I thought it would be helpful for us to see how this could go specifically into a math classroom. I know my camera is real funky right now. I was hoping to be able to stand at my board and like show you with my whole body what I do with my students. But unfortunately, I had some technology issues with the district firewall. So this is the best we can do. So you guys will just have to kind of watch my hands and imagine that I was standing up in front of you, moving my whole body. So one thing that I have to do with my students is domain and range. Those of you guys who end up teaching Algebra 1, you will also do domain and range with your students. And so I thought this would be a good example for us to get started with because this is one that I actually do in my classroom. So I took these classes with Dr. Schneider last year. And so the year before last, I did not use these strategies. Last year, I did use these strategies because I had taken the class. And I was practicing some of the things that we learned and also having to report back to her on some of the different things. And I really want y'all to know that this totally works. Like, I will not say it was my students' favorite thing to do. And I had, I teach mostly 16-year-olds. And so a lot of these were like, I am too cool for this. I don't know why you're trying to make me do this. And they would like half-heartedly do it. But the ones who did what I was asking them to do substantially increased in their ability to do what I wanted them to do. So this would be an example of a parabola, which is the same type of thing that you guys would be doing when you do domain and range with your class. And so as we're doing this, what I noticed with my students is that they mix up two things. Number one, they get domain and range backwards. And number two, they do the things in the opposite order. So when I put the domain and range into the intervals, obviously an interval has to go from the smallest value to the highest value. But for my students, that's not obvious. And so very frequently they will get the right numbers, just not in the right places. And since a lot of our homework and a lot of our tests and quizzes are electronic, if you do it backwards, there's no grace. The computer doesn't understand that when I write infinity comma 2, I meant to write 2 comma infinity and I have all the right numbers and I probably should get some kind of partial credit for that. Like the computer does not have that capability. It doesn't see 2 comma infinity and therefore it is wrong. No matter what you wrote, it's not what it wanted and therefore it is wrong. No grace. So this helped them with both things. Number one, saying the words out loud and moving their arms around helped them to remember which one was which one. And number two, moving their arms around helped them to remember which order to put things in. Okay, so first domain. And I'm going to treat you guys just like I do my 11th graders, like you would kind of talk to your 8th graders if you were doing this in Algebra 1. And so we're going to talk about the fact that domain is on the x-axis. And when you write the domain values, you write the values from left to right. Okay, so what I do is I make all my students stand up. We can't do this sitting down. That makes them very half-hearted with what they do, and also it's not nearly as effective. So if I want to get their body moving, if I want to activate those sensors in their brain, I have to get them out of their chairs. So first thing we do is we all stand up. And so I say, okay, you guys, domain is left to right. Everybody say that with me. Domain is left to right. And so as we are doing this, we are working on it together and they're all moving their hands with me. Okay, so now when I just did this, I went left to right. But if you see on your screen, it appears to you that I did it the opposite. I did it the correct way, right? I went left to right. On my body, it's backwards. So when I said left to right, I actually moved my hands from right to left, but I'm trying to make my body mimic what I want to see from my students. And I'll be 100% honest with y'all, this has caused me no end of problem with telling my right and my left because I'm so used to saying it backwards. So, okay, we all stand up. We say, okay, domain is left to right. Domain is left to right. And we go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And then, okay, I can't hear you guys. I need you to say it loud enough that Dr. White can hear you next year. Domain is what? Domain is left to right. I mean, next door, not next year. So we go and say that over and over and over and move our hands. All right, then I'm ready to have them sit down and we're going to put it on the graph. So in this case, I have the arrows up here. It goes on and on forever to the left, on and on forever to the right. So when I color it, I'm going to color it from left to right. And I'm going to color all of my domains the same color. Now for you guys, most of the functions that you do, the domain is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. In Algebra 2, we get into some that is not true. All right, I do some square roots and some different things like that. And so my domain is not always negative infinity to positive infinity. So we color from left to right, just like we say the word. So we color it, and then we look at the graph that we have. Well, I can see that it goes on and on forever this way because of the arrow, and on forever this way because of the arrow. So my domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. And while it seems silly to emphasize that, because especially for you guys in Algebra 1, almost everything you do is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. And so it's tempting just to tell them domain is negative infinity to positive infinity, let's move on. But if you don't emphasize that, why it is, that's going to cause some problems when they get to me in Algebra 2, or if they're in that honors Algebra 2 as a ninth grader and they don't understand that domain is left to right. Okay, so then we do range. We spent already some time on domain, so now we're ready to talk about range. So now we're going to stand up again and we're going to say range is bottom to top. Range is bottom to top. And I make them like bend over like they're touching the floor. Range is bottom to top. Okay, I can't hear you guys. Let's say it loud enough that they can hear us down the hallway. Ready? Range is bottom to top. And we move our hands as we're saying the word so that that part of the body is activated, activates that part of the brain as well. Okay, then I'm going to come on to my parabola. I'm going to change colors, and I'm going to draw. Here's where it begins at the bottom, and I'm going to color up because range, is bottom to top. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to color up. And again, it might be tempting just to say, well, just color this. But you have to get them to color in the right way so they put the numbers the right way. So if they color this way, they may not remember that when they write the answer, they need to start at the bottom number, the lowest possible range value, and move up. So the range on this one is -5 to infinity, but if they color it this way, maybe they're going to write infinity to -5, and they're going to write it backwards. So it's really important they do it in the right order. That's why we emphasize range is bottom to top. Okay, so that is an Algebra 1, Algebra 2 example. So I thought I'd pull some other ones. One thing that you guys are responsible for as middle school teachers is exponents and coefficients. Not only what they do, but also that vocabulary. So that as they move forward, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and the teacher says, do such and such with your exponent, or add the coefficients together. If the students don't know those vocabulary words, they can't move forward well in their mathematics. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to emphasize what's an exponent and what's a coefficient. Okay, so I've got some examples down here for my little 6th grade friends to try. I did some of this with my son over the summer while he was home from COVID. So coefficients and exponents. So coefficients are in the front, exponents are up. Okay, and then we're going to do that again. Coefficients are in the front, exponents are up. Okay, so I'm just emphasizing where they go, and I'm moving my body as I do that. Okay, so then I'm going to go through and I'm going to get my highlighters or get my colored pencils or something, and we're going to talk about coefficients are in the front. Coefficients are in the front, and I'm going to have them color all the coefficients the same color. In order for this to work, in my opinion, it works better if they're all the same. But really try to emphasize the sameness of the coefficients. All right, and then after we have practiced coefficients, now we're going to practice exponents. The exponents are up. And so I'll have them highlight the exponents in a different color, but all the same color as each other. And notice I had them right in that one right there, so they don't say B doesn't have an exponent, which they might be tempted to say here, right? Because they don't see anything. But it's not that B doesn't have an exponent, it's that B's exponent is 1. So coefficients in the front, all colored the same, exponents are up. And the same phrase, the same hand motions, the same colors, as much as you can do to get that kind of cemented in their brain. All right, so that's a 6th grade example. Here's a 7th grade example. So in 7th grade, we're looking at some math properties. I picked commutative, associative, and distributed. You might choose to pick something else. It doesn't matter. So here they are, commutative, associative, and distributive. Part of the reason I picked this one is to talk to you guys about the commutative property. Y'all, do not pronounce this commutative, right? The numbers do not communicate. They just don't. They commute. They move back and forth. So like when I taught the 291, 292 classes, I would always write this word with a big capital T. And like we would focus on the fact that that commutative property is what we're looking at there. So help your students know what this is by pronouncing it correctly. If you look at stems, and I know in middle school y'all do a lot with stems, commute is to move back and forth. So in the commutative property, the numbers move back and forth. All right, associative property. Got to be careful with this one. The word that we see inside of associative is associate. And if you associate with somebody, you hang out with them. In this one, the word distributive, you can see the word distribute. And if you distribute papers or you distribute money, you pass it out to everybody. So when I help my students with this vocabulary, I'm going to use the stems to help them with that. So I'm going to make my hands into C's, and I'm going to commute. I'm going to move things around, right? The commutative property moves things around. And I've got my hands in C's to remember that it's the commutative one, and I'm moving my hands as I do this. Commutative property moves things around. Some of my students don't know the word commute. We talk about what the word commute means. When I used to teach middle school, I would do this. Talk about what the word means. We talk about in college how you can be a commuter student or a residential student. And when I taught at Saluda Trail, so everybody at Saluda Trail is a commuter student. None of y'all spend the night here. But in college, if you live in a dorm, then you're a residential student. You're not a commuter student. So I had the opportunity to build in some vocabulary to help them learn that word. Okay, associative. So I'm going to make my hands into sign language A's, and your associates are the people you hang out with. I'm going to put my arms around my buddies, right? You can't see that very well on the camera. I'm going to put my arms around my buddies. My associates are the people I hang out with. All right, that sort of looks like parentheses. You can kind of see a parentheses there on my hand, but be careful with that because you can definitely have the commutative property with parentheses. So again, just because that's the person that I am, when I taught math 291, 292, we would do this sometimes, right? And I'm going to throw those parentheses in there, only this is not the associative property, this is the commutative property because my numbers are moving around. I did a bunch of these with my little 12-year-old over the summer as well because I want him to recognize that when he sees parentheses, he should not automatically think associative. Maybe it's associative, maybe not. All right, so distributive. I'm going to make my hands into D's, and I'm going to pass out some papers. I'm going to distribute those papers to all of my students. And as I distribute the papers, that's the same thing as I'm going to do. Like if I have a 3 here, I'm going to distribute that 3 to everything in the parentheses. So I'm making my hands into D's to remember, and I'm going to distribute. I know that one's a D. Just work with me. I'm going to distribute to all of my students. Okay, so as you do this, there's lots of others. These are just some ways that you could use that particular thing, but I thought you guys might, because so much of what I did with Dr. Schneider was very literary based. It was very English focused. I was afraid y'all might have trouble kind of moving that into a math idea. So that's how you would move it into math. That's the way it looks inside the math classroom. You're still using colors perhaps to do it. You're definitely using your body. You're using that vocabulary very purposefully, saying the same words and the same phrases, trying to get those ideas into your students' minds. And you will be surprised how much of that they take in. So for example, I do, and this is not what you guys are going to do, but I have to do in behavior. So I've got, positive even, negative even, positive odd, negative odd. So I have my students do that, like as they walk in the door. After we've been doing this a couple days, I will refuse to let them into the classroom unless they can go through the little dance and tell me what all the things are. So then I will notice during the test, they're doing this. And I think they're raising their hand because they have a question. So I'll walk over and do you have a question? No, I'm just trying to figure out the end behavior. So they have that in their mind, and whether they want to think about it that way or whether they don't, they realize that they need to move their body in that direction in order to get the right answer. To activate that piece of knowledge, they start moving around, and really when I started doing this, I saw some tremendous growth in my students with what they were able to remember and how they were able to remember it. So I just wanted to show that to you guys specifically because of it being a map.